The land of Egypt, the valley of the Nile. Green living fields and a bone-dry desert beyond. Two lands, then, set side by side, one for the living and one for the dead. A balance of men and gods. Imperial Thebes, a huge mud-silty city, master of an empire and the home of awesome gods, all housed in 100 mighty temples. Imperial Thebes, where the kings were brought home again for burial, each in his own exquisite tomb, deep under the mountains of the desert. Individual underworlds, all filled with golden gods. Tombs like Tutankhamun's.
One of the very great pleasures of the Cairo Museum is that here gold looks like gold. Not that awful weightless thing that you see in big exhibitions where they shine lights on things and they sort of float off in a sort of a glittery Christmas card look. Here, this really looks like a work of art. Try and look through the gold and see the piece. It's amazing to think that it's actually constructed out of two sheets of gold riveted together. Somebody's worked it with a hammer from the back, a man tapping away. And he's done it with such accuracy that he's even reproduced the cheekbones slightly tilted, because Tutankhamun had an accident when he was a boy, and his cheekbones were 1/8 of an inch out, and so's that gold mask. People I knew who had seen this mask when it first came from the tomb said that it looked more shiny, brighter than it does now. That's because they put such a high polish on it that when the modern cleaners came to wipe it with a cloth, they scratched the ancient surface.
What a marvel! An object made by people whose lives were saturated in deep colours and shining textures. Master craftsmen of breathtaking precision. And this in the age when Stonehenge was new.
Of all the hundreds and thousands of people that filed past Tut's gold mask, very few of them ever bothered to come here. Yet this case in the museum contains some of its minor masterpieces. It was set up about 80 years ago by one of the early directors of the museum. And in it, he put really the finest small objects that had ever been found in Egypt. You see, most of the things that are this size were usually sort of bashed out in the workshops, and they're pretty things, but they're not wonderful. But this director, he had such an eye that he could fathom the masterpieces. And this case just jumps with life. Look at that piece there, for example, that tiny little statue at the top. It's the only known statue of the man who built the Great Pyramid, King Cheops. And that little thing there, extraordinary strong face of a woman, Queen T, who gave birth to this heretic king who tried to turn all of Egypt upside down. There's all of her character stamped on that little bit of stone there. Now this woman, she's equally filled with life as the queen and the king. Well, she was the wife of a man who spent most of his life gathering corn for a small village in Upper Egypt. She was an interesting person. She was very quick-witted. And when her husband was away, she actually took control of all the village affairs. One of the things she did, for example, was to go round and inspect all the measures for the wheat with which the people made bread. She wrote a very cross note to her husband saying that somebody was fiddling them, and when he came back, she'd jolly well see he got punished. She also looked at all the family affairs as well. Very competent woman. In fact, in her day, she ran the village. And these other people along here, they're probably her friends in the same village. It's a village we know more about, probably, than any other village in the ancient world. They're also the actors of our drama.
And this is where they lived, the village of Deir el-Medina, hidden in the hills of Thebes. A village of craftsmen, of families, of men, women and children, packed in neat houses set side by side. And how remarkable it is that modern science has given us more information about these ancient people than we have about most people of the last century.
This, for example, was the Bohemian part of town. Over there lived some scribes who painted coffins in their spare time. Over there lived the leader of the village choir. I don't expect his neighbours ever made much complaint about the choir practice, though, because next door lived this awful Heathcliff-like character who spent most of his time bellowing at his poor old adoptive stepfather. And in here lived a little old lady who so loved her pet monkey that she adopted a slave boy to sit and feed it grapes all day. And in this house, well, there lived the village storekeeper. It's not a very interesting job, actually, but sort of important, and the villagers considered his fat jars so important, his big jars of fat that were rendered down from the oxen that they used to roast. The two men went to court over one of these for 17 years. And here, the little village scribe, in his spare time, used to sit and write love poetry. Can you see him, licking his brush and slowly writing these words by himself? I kissed your open mouth, and it made me drunker than wine. The modern father of our village, the man who really has given all its people back to us in the modern world, was a Czech called Jaroslav Černý. He was a professor of Egyptology in Oxford. He studied the village and its people for 50 years. Even when he was 70, he was still walking slopes like this, climbing, looking for the village's inscriptions on these rocks over here. Our ancient villagers scribbled millions of little texts, little graffiti, told you about their days of life and birth and things like this. And that is why an elderly Oxford professor was still scrambling about here even when he'd retired, because Professor Černý knew these people name by name. He could tell individual handwriting. He could tell when a man had written something as a young man and an old man. And these texts are so detailed in themselves. This one here, for example, is written on the 13th of September, 1275 BC. Can you see him? There he is, a tiny little faint head. You see it there? And his two arms coming up and praying. Looks like he's waving to us from 1275 BC, doesn't it? That's the royal scribe, Ramosa. What he's doing is announcing his appointment to the village as a royal scribe to work in a king's tomb. He was very proud of being a scribe because Ramosa was the son of a messenger, was not a scribe at all. And normally, scribes, of course, it would be handed down from father to son. So nobody would actually celebrate the appointment because you'd be celebrating the death of your dad. But Ramosa was a self-made man, and so he was pretty proud of it. And this is what Professor Černý came up here to find, this little figure.
He was a man, in the words of Auden's poem, against who the Bureau of Statistics could find no fault, the perfect Egyptian, the man on the Theban omnibus. And we know all of this from the villagers' own records, much of which was written on the most surprising